So the last thing, conduction system of the heart. So we start up here, SA node, because of the location of it. The node are made up of conducting cells. This whole electrical system is made up of conducting cells. Right? So you have the SA node, and what the SA node does is it sets the primary pace of the heart. It's called the primary pacemaker of the heart, and it sets that pace at an adult at 60 to 100 times per minute. That's the normal heart rate of an adult, 60 to 100 times per minute. Sort of the mean is 70 to 80, but the SA node depolarizes or fires, sends its electrical impulse 60 to 100 times per minute. That is called its intrinsic firing rate. Intrinsic means inside, right? So this has an intrinsic firing rate or depolarization rate of 60 to 100 times per minute. It'll do it on its own through all those conducting cells has those three properties, right? And it's going to do it on its own. So 60 to 100 times per minute, it's going to start, it's going to depolarize, and we have to sort of take this like a slow walk, right? Because it happens with less than a second. Less than a second, the whole thing is done. If I was Flash, I could talk that fast and have it all out, but I'm not Flash. That would be very good for me, being a commuter, to be Flash. I could get to school really quick. Okay, so the SA node, primary pacemaker of the heart, depolarizes 60 to 100 times per minute. Once it depolarizes, it also sends an impulse over to the left ventricles, because left atrium. So it depolarizes, sends information over to the left atrium, and the atrium contracts in a downward motion. So when they contract, it contracts in a downward motion, pushing blood into the ventricles. It also conducts electricity. Now these are both internodal pathways. Now if I'm speaking, I have to be careful, because if I'm speaking Texan, I'm going to leave out the T, right? I'm going to say internodal pathways, like winter. It's winter. You got to put that T in there, because it makes a difference in the word, right? Inner means what? The prefix inner, I-N-N-E-R. That's intra. Inner, like interstitial fluid. Let me tell you, because that was a long time ago. Inner means between. Okay? Intra, no wait, maybe I'm getting confused now. Inner, between. Inter means between. Okay? So inter means between. So this internodal pathway is between the atrium. Okay? So you have to be careful. Inner is something else. Well, it's interstitial fluid. Okay, inner is not, it's not one. There's not one. That's why I can't remember it. Right? Inner, there's not one. I-N-N-E-R, there's not one. There's intra, which means inside. Okay, so inter is between. Intra is inside. So you have this electrical pathway, and these are cardiac fibers. They're just conductive fibers. Okay? And you have the pathway down to the next part of it, the AV node, atrial ventricular node, or the AV node, and it sits down here sort of at the bottom of the atrium. So you have a conductive fibers that conduct, let's just call it electricity for now, conduct the impulse down to the AV node, okay? When the SA node depolarizes, on the EKG, like the short video said, it causes this on the EKG, this P wave. Now we know it's a P wave because it's upright and well-rounded and it precedes a QRS complex. But that's for a later day. Okay? It produces this on an EKG. You can have an EKG or ECG, the same. The K is British, this is America. Right? Okay? So EKG or ECG, you can have these two different things. But when the SA node depolarizes on an EKG, it produces a P wave, normally it produces a P wave, okay? The EKG only gives you electrical activity of the heart. It doesn't give you mechanical. It doesn't tell you that the ventricles actually contract. If it's all working correctly, yes, the ventricles and the atriums contract off of from the EKG, right? But the EKG alone only tells you about electrical activity of the heart. It tells you nothing about mechanical activity or contraction. That's very important. Why is that very important? One reason. Why do you think that's important? It's a test question. Okay? That's one reason it's important. The second reason that we'll find out later is you can have a beautiful EKG and not have a pulse. The patient can have a beautiful EKG rhythm and not have a pulse. It's called PEA, pulseless electrical activity. All right, so there's two reasons there. So what happens is here, the electrical impulse is sent from the SA node 60 to 100 times per minute. It's conducted down to the AV node, and right in here, essentially, okay, is the time, because the EKG, as it goes across, is time. All right? So this little pause right here is called the PRI, the interval between the P wave and the R wave. Just take it for what it is for right now. But this is the delay at the AV node. Okay? This is where you see, this is the P wave, signifies SA node depolarization. The PRI signifies the time that it takes to go through the AV node. Okay. Now the big question. Why the time delay? Why is there needed time delay at the AV node? Think about the function of the heart. The atrium contract, and then the ventricles contract. The atrium contract, then the ventricles contract. Why do we need a time delay? You're actually sort of close, yeah. But you would have to explain all that. What are two big phases of the heart? About systolic and diastolic. Systolic meaning the working phase, contraction phase. Diastolic, the relaxing phase or rest phase. So in diastole, the heart's at rest. What is the heart doing when it's at rest? No, it's in diastole. Very good. The atriums are refilling. Okay? So if the atriums are in diastole, they're refilling. The ventricles are in diastole, they're refilling, correct? If we don't have this pause here at the AV node, what don't we have? That's right. What's your name? Okay. You don't have refilling. Michelle's right. We don't have the refilling time. Without the delay at the AV node, there's no refilling time. The heart would essentially, the atrium and the ventricles would essentially contract at one time, at once, right? Remember, even with light, there's a delay. So if I was to turn off this light, that's pretty quick, right? But if you timed it somehow, there's a delay there in time. So there is a delay. The AV node represents that delay in order for the ventricles in the atrium to refill. Without that, it decreases refilling time. Hang on to that term, decreases refilling time. Because when we get into cardiac emergencies, we'll talk about other things that decreases refilling time. So Michelle knows that if we decrease refilling time, what is also going to decrease? That's right. She's right if you could hear her. The blood being circulated would decrease as well. That's good. That's very good. So the blood would decrease. So the blood volume that you're circulating would decrease. If you decrease filling time, you're going to decrease the amount out. Decrease input, decrease output, right? Does that make sense to everybody? That's very important. Because if we decrease output, that's called cardiac output, right? Cardiac output, we decrease cardiac output. Now what do we decrease? Go ahead, you answered all of them, so knock yourself out. If we decrease cardiac output, what do we also decrease? Hang on, we'll make sure he gets that first, huh? That's correct. You decrease the amount of oxygen to the cells. That's bad, right? That's a bad thing. So we'll connect all those together quite well at a later date. So the intrinsic firing rate of the node, the SA node is 60 to 100 times per minute, okay? The AV node also has an intrinsic firing rate. Let's just use 40 to 60 right now. Those numbers will vary a bit, okay? The numbers vary a bit depending on what textbook you read, okay? So you have the intrinsic firing rate of the AV node is 60 to 40 to 60. Now it doesn't fire 40 to 60 times. It only fires when the SA node doesn't depolarize. It's a backup system. Again, we'll learn a lot more at a later date. But the SA node, let's say for some reason the SA node is not depolarizing, we still want the heart to beat, correct? Okay? So if the AV node doesn't receive a signal from the SA node quickly, I don't know the time, but there's a short amount of time there, then it's going to depolarize on its own, so the heart will contract. It's a good backup system. And its intrinsic firing rate is 40 to 60. Okay, now, knowing what you know, if the SA node is knocked out for some reason and the AV node has to depolarize, what is the EKG complex not going to have? P wave, very good. It's not going to have a P wave. That's good. Did you guys learn this last year, or you're just sort of picking up on it? You're smart. That's good. It's good. It's a good progression. Okay? Now, the next part of it is the electrical conduction system here travels from the AV node into this part called the bundle of His. it's just like a big bundle of conductive fibers, okay? And then it branches. The left and right bundle branch. So it comes down to the left side, the left ventricle, and the right ventricles, because the ventricles contract together. Oops, I didn't want to do that. This is important, that the ventricles contract together, and the ventricles contract in an upward motion. So the ventricles contract like this. It pushes blood upward. That will be hugely important when we talk about heart attacks, how the blood is pushed upward. But not today. And then the terminal point is the Purkinje fibers. These are like just all these conductive fibers sort of stuck in the ventricles, okay? Because once the electrical impulse reaches the Purkinje fibers, then the ventricles are going to contract. It causes the ventricles to contract, okay? Now, in just the anatomy alone, there's probably another hour or so that we'll talk about later, electrical anatomy, okay? But again, that's for later. We're still forming that puzzle, putting those pieces of puzzle together, okay? We don't need to do it all in one day. There's no reason to sit down and put the whole puzzle together in one day. Then you won't have anything to do the rest of the days, right? Now, when the signal or the energy reaches the ventricles and the ventricles depolarize, okay, it's going to cause what's called a QRS complex. This would be QRS complex, right? Now, that looks familiar, correct? I mean, at least from television, you have a QRS. It's not that wide. It should be narrow. I'm not going to say my drawing is poor, but, you know. QRS complex. Not everybody has a Q wave, okay? The definition of a Q wave is the first negative deflection off the isoelectric line. Now you have this, remember the midline is this invisible line that goes down the middle of the body, right? The isoelectric line is a line on the EKG that goes along the size of the what's that called? It goes with the P wave, that line right here. I think there's a math term that goes with it, like the axis or something. No. Huh? I don't know. Anyway, it goes this way, right? It's this invisible line at the P wave. It's isoelectric. Iso meaning neutral. It's neutral. There's no up and down. This is up and down, right? Down would be what? Negative, and up would be positive. Good. So you have a negative deflection. So the Q wave, by definition, is the first negative deflection off the isoelectric line. First negative deflection off the isoelectric line. So the R wave would be what? The first positive deflection. Then the S wave would be second negative deflection. Very good. It's that easy. Don't kiss principle, right? Keep it simple. It really is that easy. Now we had the depolarization. So this is the QRS complex. Okay. This is we probably have, once we get there in cardiac emergencies, we probably have about 45 minutes of lecture talking about the R wave. It's cool though. It's something you're seeing in the hospital that you need to be able to identify. It's pretty neat. It goes off the R wave. So this right here, we'll spend about 45 minutes talking about that. See where I get the whole year I can talk about cardiac emergencies. Okay, so you have this QRS. Now remember, this is only electrical The EKG only offers electrical activity, okay? So we don't know if the actual heart contracted. So what should this QRS complex correspond with? What should you're looking at an EKG, what should the EKG correspond with if everything is working correctly? What should the patient have? Pulse. Right. So you could put your finger on which pulse? The radius off the radial thumb, radial pulse, and every time that you see this on the screen, you should feel a boom boom, right? See how well you studied your con notes. What is that boom boom actually called?
Love dove.
Love dove, right? Very good. So you have a love dove, okay? Now the only thing missing here is the T wave. And the T wave indicates repolarization, ventricular repolarization. Okay? That's just a simple overview of the EKG complex and the electrical activity of the heart. It's the basics. Okay? What about this segment right here, this gap here? This is going to be huge next 6 weeks when we start talking about cardiac emergency.
Is that a PRI?
Huh?
Is that a PRI?
No.
Is that diastole?
That is during diastole. Yeah. But this section here is referred to as the ST segment. Okay. Segment 7. Segment MENT. Is that right? What happens when someone's having an acute MI or heart attack, okay, on the EKG, it shows up sometimes as ST segment elevation. So this segment here on the EKG will actually go up. Okay. If this segment goes up in 2 or more leads on a 12 lead, then that patient's having what's called a STEMI. ST elevation myocardial infarction. See why we call it STEMI? Yeah, ST elevation myocardial infarction. Infarction, that weird word, means dead tissue. So they're having a STEMI or they're having a heart attack. Again, things to come. We'll learn about STEMI. That means someone's either coming in having a heart attack or they walked in the door and they're having a heart attack. Sometimes they walk in having chest pain and they're having a heart attack. Right? That covers a lot, right? A lot of information over the electrical system. It's just going to take you time to digest this, okay? I do hold you responsible for this information because I wrote it on the board, okay? But this is going to take some time to sort of let it absorb as we learn and go. But definitely the pieces and parts. So on the test, if on a quiz or something, you would see what causes a P wave on the EKG. You would say something like SA no depolarization. Would that make sense to you? If you saw that type of question. What does the QRS complex replication, right? T wave represents ventricular repolarization. So you have repolarization, ventricle repolarization. What are you missing? Now, ventricular depolarization is here. This is atrial depolarization. atrial repolarization, right? Is that what you're saying? Yeah, you're missing atrial repolarization.
Is that U-wave?
Huh?
Is that U-wave?
No. Where did you learn about U-wave?
It says right here, U-wave.
Okay, disregard that for now. Okay. See, this is time, okay, coming across. So this would be what if this was on a graph coming up and down like that? What would that be? If one way's time, this is what? No, just on a graph. This equals time. What does this equal? Because this is in voltage, so it would equal what? Amplitude. Right? So this would equal amplitude. Okay? So what happens is on atrial repolarization is this EKG complex is so big in amplitude, okay, it covers up the atrial repolarization. You just can't see it because it's hidden underneath this QRS complex somewhere. That's what they told me 20 years ago, so I believe it. All right. Everybody good there? Not too much more. Oh, we don't have time. And there's the picture of it this is all what we've talked about. So you have this picture in your notes, correct? So, right? Yeah, it's little, but you have it. Do you? Oh, okay. It's real little. Get you one of the reading glasses to look at it, okay? We'll take a picture of it. Oop, too late. This is where we'll stop. I need to stop, right? I can't think about. I'm losing it. Any questions here? That's enough. So what we'll get into next time, briefly, to finish up cardiac. We've already looked at this. So that this is a action potential of a cardiac cell, and this is how it corresponds with we'll pick up, and then the EKG paper, and then we'll move on to a different organ system, okay?